The coffee smelled like copper and fear. I stared at the cup James had placed before me with such tender care, as if it were a final gift before a long journey. Perhaps it was. Specially for you, darling. His smile didn't reach his eyes. They remained cold as stones at the bottom of a lake. Nina's dining table gleamed under the chandelier, the perfect setting for the perfect crime. I'd always admired her taste. The irony was that at this very table, I first felt trust transform into poison. 6 months ago. Celebrating my Henderson Corp contract. Champagne, toasts, embraces. Then, 3 days in intensive care. Doctors called it acute food toxicity of unknown etiology. I called it a warning I didn't understand. Christina? Nina's voice pulled me back to reality. Didn't you hear? James is asking why you're not drinking. She sat across from me, her own cup untouched. Of course. They never drink with me. One always watches. I lifted the cup, feeling the familiar weight of panic in my chest. How many times can you dance with death before luck turns away? Sorry, thinking about tomorrow's presentation, I smiled, holding the cup near my lips. James and Nina exchanged a glance. Quick. Conspiratorial. Victorious. And I understood, this would be the last time. Either for me or for them. My fingers trembled as I pretended to dial. Excuse me, urgent client call. Nina, may I use your study? Of course, she waved with calculated indifference, but I noticed her shoulders tense. Walking past her chair, I did what I'd rehearsed in my mind hundreds of times. Stumbled. Grabbed the table. In the confusion, our cups switched places, perfectly, invisibly, like a magician's trick. God, I'm sorry. I straightened, checking if everything was in place. It's nothing. Nina wasn't looking at me anymore. Her gaze was fixed on James's phone. 4 months ago. James's birthday. I accidentally saw their text exchange. 1 more week and Henderson is mine. She's too weak after that tea. I still thought it was just a cruel joke then. Naive fool. In Nina's study, I stood by the door where I could see everything, and pulled out my phone. Not for a call. For video recording. My real mistake wasn't trusting them. It was coming here again and again, hoping I was wrong. That my paranoia was stress-related. That the man I loved wasn't capable of this. But love is blind. And survival demands clear vision. Nina lifted the cup. The moment froze. I felt a wild urge to scream, stop her, turn everything back. Even now, knowing the truth, part of me desperately clung to the possibility I was wrong. Then I remembered the doctor's face when he said another poisoning could be fatal. Remembered James standing by my hospital bed, squeezing my hand, whispering, "Poor thing, must have eaten something bad." And I pressed record. Nina took a sip, and time resumed its normal flow. Nothing at first. She set down the cup, said something to James. I couldn't hear over my pounding heart. Then their conversation continued as if nothing happened. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was nothing there. A crazy thought flashed. What if I've become paranoid, truly imagining all this? Then Nina's hand twitched. Barely noticeable, like a slight spasm. She frowned, looked at her palm, surprised, clenched her fingers. Something wrong? James's voice was cautiously indifferent. I don't know. Nina tried to smile, but it came out crooked. Strange feeling. James leaned toward her, and I saw his gaze slide to the cup. His face instantly paled. Nina, his voice was quiet but tense as a string ready to snap. Which cup did you drink from? What? She blinked in confusion. Mine, of course. But then she looked at the table. At 2 identical cups. At the place where I'd been sitting. Understanding appeared on her face like a crack in ice. James, her voice shook, what did you? Where's Christina? He stood abruptly, looking around. I emerged from the study, holding my phone at eye level. The camera captured everything. Here, my calmness surprised even me. Should I call an ambulance? 8 months ago. Our anniversary. James gave me a pendant, elegant, expensive, perfect. I wore it until I started choking during an important meeting. Turned out the metal was treated with a substance causing allergic reactions. Can't believe the jeweler screwed up like that, James fumed, hugging me in the hospital. Now I understand, it was a rehearsal. Nina tried to stand, but her legs buckled. James caught her, and in his eyes was genuine horror. Not because his sister was poisoned, but because the wrong person drank. This couldn't, you weren't supposed to. He muttered, lowering Nina to the floor. What wasn't I supposed to do, James? My voice was sharp as blades. Drink the coffee you prepared for me? Nina's eyes widened. The trembling intensified, spreading through her body in waves. Christina, she groaned, call, please. I was already dialing 911. Not for her sake. For the evidence that needed documenting. Emergency services, I told the operator, not taking my eyes off James. My sister-in-law drank poisoned coffee. Yes, I said, poisoned. Meant for me. Paramedics burst into the house in 7 minutes. Professional, fast, efficient. Nina could barely speak, her body convulsing. James stood aside, his face a mask of false horror. But his hands told the truth, nervously clenching and unclenching in the same rhythm as when filing fraudulent tax returns a year ago. I'd studied his gestures well. Sir, will you ride with us? The young paramedic asked. James looked at me. His gaze read like a cornered animal's panic. Yes, of course. No, my answer was firm. I'll go. He'll stay here and wait for police. Police? The paramedic raised his eyebrows in surprise. I showed him the phone with the recording. This isn't an accident. This is attempted murder. 10 months ago. I found a crumpled prescription in the trash near James's office. A set of chemical names I didn't understand. Showed it to him laughing. You decided to become a chemist? He snatched the paper, burned it in an ashtray. Work nonsense, he replied. I didn't think anything of it. Now I regret not photographing it. On the stretcher, Nina suddenly spoke, words flying out in bursts between spasms. Not him, my idea. Christina, he just helped. I leaned closer, camera still recording. Why, Nina? She choked, tears rolling from her eyes. Henderson, you stole my client. I worked 3 years, and you, in 3 months. He chose me himself, my calmness surprised even me. Fair competition. Fair, even in this state, fury sounded in her voice. You slept with James, to get his connections, used us. The world turned upside down. What? I didn't recognize my own voice. James went even paler. Nina, shut up, he hissed. But she couldn't. The poison loosened her tongue along with her muscles. He fell in love, didn't plan to, but I reminded him, why he met you, connections, clients, you were a tool. The paramedics were securing her to the stretcher, preparing to carry her out. I stood like a pillar of ice. He told me, after each date, how far you let him go, what you said about work. Nina's words faded. We laughed, so naive. Enough. James shouted. But it was too late. Nina was already being carried out, and in my head, a new mosaic was forming. Not just poisoning. Not just professional jealousy. I was never loved. 3 years of marriage were a long con. I looked at my husband, this stranger, and suddenly everything became crystal clear. When? I asked quietly. When did you decide I was no longer needed? His silence was the answer. When you got the Thompson Industries offer, he finally said, his voice empty. Biggest contract of the year. If you'd accepted, Nina would be forever in the shadows. And I? He smiled bitterly. I'd get less in the divorce if you became that successful. The purity of cynicism was almost beautiful. At the hospital, I sat in the waiting room when Detective Rodriguez arrived. Tall, with gray temples and eyes that had seen too much human depravity. Mrs. Bennett? You called about an attempted murder? I handed her my phone with the recording. She watched, her face remaining impassive, only her jaw tightening slightly at the end. Strong work, she finally said. But why didn't you come forward earlier if you suspected? I unfolded the folder I'd brought. 6 months of documents, hospital records, blood samples I'd secretly kept, screenshot messages, conversation recordings. Because suspicions aren't enough. I needed irrefutable evidence. Today I got it. The detective reviewed the papers, her surprise growing with each page. Are you a lawyer? Marketing executive, I smiled without joy. But when someone's trying to kill you, you learn fast how to collect evidence. 7 months ago, I hired a private investigator. Not to follow James, to check his finances. Turned out he and Nina had a joint account. Money transfers on days of my hospitalizations. Payments for laboratory services. I didn't understand then what they were buying. Now I do, poison components. There's mention of a private investigator here. Detective Rodriguez looked up. Where's his report? With my lawyer. Along with the will I changed 2 months ago, and an explanation that if I suddenly die, James and Nina should be investigated. You were preparing for the worst. I was preparing to survive. The door opened, and a doctor entered, Dr. Chin, the same one who treated me during the first hospitalization. Mrs. Bennett, he stopped in surprise. You're here because of my sister-in-law. She accidentally poisoned herself with a substance meant for me. Understanding instantly lit his face. Then those previous incidents were not accidents. I brought my old test results. I pulled out another folder. Can you compare them with what's currently in Nina's system? Dr. Chin took the folder, flipping through pages. My God, he whispered. It's a progression. Each time the concentration increased. They were experimenting, Detective Rodriguez said. Finding a dose that would cause death but look like natural causes. At that moment, James arrived. He tried to look like a concerned husband, but his acting skills fell short. Christina, thank God. How's Nina? I came as soon as police allowed. Sir, Detective Rodriguez stood. James Bennett, you're under arrest on suspicion of attempted murder. He stepped back, raising his hands. This is absurd. I love my wife. Nina must have been confused, she was in shock. We have a recording of her confession, the detective shook her head. And recordings of your conversations with Mrs. Bennett. And financial documents. And private investigator testimony. I watched James's face change, from outrage to panic, then to cold calculation. She set this all up, he suddenly said, pointing at me. Nina was jealous of her success, yes, maybe did something. But I didn't know. Christina's using this to accuse me because she found out about my affair with the secretary. Lie after lie, with such ease. What affair? I asked curiously. You know what? With Laura. That's why you put something in Nina's coffee, to frame us both. Detective Rodriguez looked at me questioningly. Mrs. Bennett, do you know about an affair? There's no affair, I answered calmly. Laura is my cousin, who, incidentally, is married and has been living in Australia for the past 2 years. James is creating an alibi on the fly. The expression on James's face when he realized he'd failed was worth all those months of fear. The trial lasted 3 weeks, but every minute changed me irreversibly. I sat in the courtroom, listening to experts describe toxicology analyses, witnesses recount James and Nina's strange behavior. Each fact was a brick in the wall of evidence I'd so carefully built. But the hardest day was when their lawyer spoke. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Bennet, that you have a history of mental disorders?" I knew this question would come. I'd prepared for it. After the first poisoning, I saw a therapist, yes. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. Caused by what exactly? The realization that someone was trying to kill me. Or paranoia that led to false accusations? Paranoia is irrational fear, my answer was firm. My fear turned out to be rational and justified. The lawyer paused, flipping through papers. "You claim your husband married you purely for mercenary reasons. Isn't this a result of your traumatized psyche misinterpreting normal relationships?" And here I did something I wasn't prepared for. I cried. Not from pain. From understanding that part of me still didn't believe. Still waited for James to say, "It was a mistake, I truly loved you, something went wrong." Part of me still loved the illusion he'd created. I wanted to believe that, I said through tears. God knows I'd give anything for this to be my paranoia. For me to be mentally ill rather than him being morally depraved. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. "But the evidence says otherwise," I continued. "And I have to choose between a comfortable illusion and painful truth. I chose life. 2 months ago. The night before executing the plan. I stood by James's closet, looking at his suits, his ties, all these things that smelled like him. Remembered our wedding, our laughter, moments that seemed happy. And I sobbed, saying goodbye not to my husband, but to the woman I'd been, trusting, in love, naive. Nina testified in her own defense. She'd lost weight, grayed, looked 10 years older. I was jealous, she spoke monotonously. Christina had everything, beauty, talent, ease in communication. And I worked twice as hard and got twice as little. It wasn't fair. "So you decided to kill her," the prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "I decided to level the playing field," Nina raised her gaze, and I saw something terrible in it. She still believed she was right. At first just get a little sick. Miss a couple meetings. But she kept winning. And I realized that as long as she's alive, I'll always be second. "And James?" Nina smiled, and it was the most horrifying smile I'd seen. "James always did what I told him. Since childhood. He was the pretty shell, and I was the brain. Our mother understood this. That's why she left the entire business to me, and him, nothing. He hated it. Hated me. But couldn't resist." I looked at James. He sat with his head bowed, and suddenly I saw him as he truly was. Not a cruel master manipulator. A weak man under a stronger woman's thumb. It didn't excuse him. But it explained. "Mrs. Bennet," the judge addressed me on the final day, "do you have anything to say before sentencing?" I stood, feeling the weight of hundreds of gazes. "I want to say that justice isn't revenge. I don't rejoice in their punishment. But I'm grateful for the chance to live on, knowing the truth." When the judge announced the verdict, 15 years for Nina, 10 for James, I felt no triumph. Only emptiness. A year later, I stood on stage at the Nashville Business Leaders Conference, looking at a sea of faces. The Henderson contract had doubled. Thompson Industries offered a partnership. I was named Woman of the Year by 3 different publications. But every night I woke up checking if the doors were locked. "Success," I said into the microphone, "isn't just about talent. It's about who you trust and why." After the speech, a young woman approached me. In her eyes, I recognized a familiar expression, someone who suspects the worst but is afraid to admit it. "How did you know?" she asked quietly. "For certain." I remembered the coffee cup, the metallic smell, the decision that changed everything. "I didn't know for certain," I answered honestly. I trusted my instincts more than my fear of being wrong. She nodded, and I saw something shift in her gaze. Determination instead of doubt. That evening, I opened my laptop and saw an email from James. The first in a year. Christina. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I don't deserve it. I just want you to know, I really did fall in love. Somewhere between the first date and the wedding. Nina noticed and used it. Said if I didn't help, she'd tell you the truth. And I'm a coward, so I agreed. Every day here I think about the moment I could have said no. There were hundreds of such moments. I didn't use a single one. You deserve better than a memory of me. But if you ever want to understand why people do terrible things to loved ones, you know where to find me. James. I sat for a long time, staring at the screen. Part of me wanted to respond. Ask 1,000 questions that still had no answers. Instead, I opened a new message and wrote to a different recipient. Laura. Remember you said there's a position at your company in Melbourne? I'm ready for a change of scenery. Not escape, a beginning. Christina. After sending the email, I walked to the window. Nashville glowed with lights, the city where I'd experienced the most terrifying and most empowering moments of my life. On the windowsill stood an empty coffee cup. I'd brewed it myself, drink it myself, trusting only myself. Maybe someday I'll learn to trust people again. Maybe not. But I learned the most important thing, to trust myself. My instincts. My strength. My right to life. The phone vibrated. Laura replied instantly, "When are you flying?" I looked at my calendar. Tomorrow at 10, presentation of a new project. Day after tomorrow, Forbes interview. Next week, opening my own agency. And suddenly I understood, I don't want to go anywhere. Not because I'm afraid. But because I've finally stopped letting fear or the past dictate my decisions. Thank you, but I'm staying. There's a contract to finish. A life to live. Here. After sending the message, I took the empty cup and went to the kitchen. Tomorrow would bring new coffee, new challenges, new opportunities to trust or not. And I'd be ready for anything. Because survival isn't just about avoiding death. It's about choosing life. Again and again. Even when it's scary. Especially when it's scary.